Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Saurabh Sarkar, your host for today's webinar. It gives me immense pleasure welcoming you all to a live webinar on the theme of digital transformation. This webinar is hosted by Cyber Media Research in association with IBM. For the duration of presentation, all participants' line will be on listen-only mode. After the presentation, we will be having a question and answer session. And yes, your feedback is very important for us, so kindly submit your feedback at the end of the webinar. Now I would like to hand over the floor to Mr. Anil Chopra, Vice President, Research and Consulting, Cyber Media, who will share his insights on data-to-data insights. Thank you, and over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Saurabh, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking out time to join us on this webinar today on going beyond data and into data insights. I think we are living in the data economy, and there's everything around us is just generating so much data, and it's important that we are able to draw out insights from this data on time, and which has become extremely essential for today's business. So that's what I'm going to talk about today in the next 15 minutes or so, wherein I'll talk about what this new data economy is and why it's really important to draw timely insights from this data for any business to thrive. So I think one thing to really look at is that the entire ecosystem of connected devices is really increasing, right? There are so many more devices now that are available, and they're actually growing. So whether it's social media, whether it's different types of devices, whether it's for healthcare, or whether it's for various types of logistics, and any kind of device that you have today, it's actually connecting to the internet. And so one thing is that besides this, so for example, you can use smart wristbands that track vital statistics and how much we have walked or how many steps we have taken. So it can do that. There are digital glucometers that can measure blood sugar level, etc. So there are different types of devices that can monitor a wide variety of data about us. And besides that, of course, besides this human-to-machine connectivity, there is a lot of ecosystem that is growing of device-to-device connectivity, which is also known as the Internet of Things, and where these devices are getting smarter and they're capable of operating on their own without any human intervention. They can actually talk to each other, and each one of them is constantly generating a lot of data. And what's more, all this is going to grow. And in fact, it's estimated that spending on IoT hardware is going to exceed $800 billion US dollars this year. And there's going to be 21 billion connected devices by 2020. And in India, particularly, adoption of this IoT and these connected devices is expected to be seen in utilities, manufacturing, automotive, commercial telematics, and even transport and logistics. So I think it's important to realize that just about every device that is coming in today is able to connect to the internet. It's able to generate a lot of data, and we need to understand that how we can actually leverage this data as an enterprise. So actually, what is happening is that data has now become the new oil. So just as oil was the basis for transformation in the 20th century, data is now becoming the basis for transformation in the new 21st century. And it's no longer, enough today. If you look at data about individuals as well, your customers, it's not enough to have structured data, which is just name, address, phone number, and email ID, etc. It's also important to have there a lot of unstructured data about people. So, that completes the actual overview or a view of a customer today. It's not enough just to have basic data, but also what they're doing on social media, what are their smartphone usage habits, what sort of devices are they using. It's important to understand them, your customers, in totality, because anything that you do, all decisions will be taken based on all this data that they're actually generating. So organizations, need to look beyond their traditional processes and understand how can they best make use of all this data. And which is where, if you look at some of the digital-led companies like Airbnb and Uber, where they've actually succeeded, without really owning any assets like cabs or hotels they've actually, created thriving businesses. That has been possible because they've looked beyond traditional processes and actually used data for business benefit. So it's important to realize what kind of things you can actually do with data and look beyond the traditional processes that you follow in the organization if you really want to be able to leverage this data. And as you get more IoT devices, they will interconnect with each other. There'll be different types of new relationships, and as they generate more data, you'll need algorithms to be able to control what data you're getting and what kind of decisions to take from it. So in fact, today, if you look at it, the whole thing is actually being driven by algorithms today. Data in itself is actually useless unless and until you use algorithms to draw value and extract the real value from this data. You need algorithms, okay? And they're actually forming the core of any of the insights, and any action from that data. So you look at some of the applications, there are new products and services that are coming out every day, right from driverless cars, where they can actually, use sensors to build complete 3D map of everything around the vehicle, and then they empower the car to make better decisions than a human driver. So, that's all based on algorithms. And in digitally led companies, they're already being used extensively. Amazon uses it to, recommend products to you, or Netflix uses it to help you figure out what you should be watching next. And of course, the initial, algorithms which were used by Siri, Cortana, and OK Google, which, are able to help you understand what you're saying and then, do things for you based on whatever action that you take. So algorithms are actually the core of what you really need to for when as this data is being generated. In fact, today, now the customers also expect, their expectations are also changing, right? They expect to interact with you from anywhere and from any device. So it's important to ensure that consistent experience happens. You're able to give the consistent experience to all the customers across all channels and devices. So it's important for to integrate data coming from all channels and analyze it so that the customers get a seamless experience. Okay. In fact, customer experience, a poor customer experience is no longer the other department's fault, because for the customer, you are one company. Okay, and they'll expect a seamless experience no matter which department they actually interact with. So this is where you actually, need to be able to integrate data from various channels and be able to analyze it, because customers will expect the same experience no matter where they are. And in fact, recent studies indicate that, increase in customer satisfaction is the top driver for any kind of artificial intelligence deployment in India. And AI, of course, is the basis for most of these algorithms. Their AI applications are using a lot of these algorithms. So I think it's time to analyze and map the customer's overall journey with the help of analytics. Well, I think I've talked a lot about how it's, data can be used and why it's important, but I think it also helps to understand this with use cases, because there are many examples of how various companies are actually using data in different ways. So let's look at, for example, the government. I think, BJP very clearly used big data to win the elections, where they mined a lot of internet data to understand voter sentiments and local issues. So it changed completely how elections are actually fought. Similarly, websites like matrimony.com, they add about 8,000 subscribers on a daily basis, but they're able to capture customer data from a variety of sources. Be it from emails, be it from SMSs, which is going back to the point I said that, it's no longer enough just to have structured data of a customer like name, address, and telephone number. Today, the customers interact on so many channels that you want to be able to capture this unstructured data as well, which is what this website is actually doing, and then they use this data to drive marketing campaigns, and which helps them ultimately match potential partners faster. Another example is of the Bangalore Water Supply and Sewage Board. They're using actually big data and predictive analytics to create systems that can monitor water distribution systems. So essentially earlier 45% of their water supply was going unaccounted for. Now this solution helps them detect large changes in water flow with real-time monitoring. So it's possible because they're using a mix of sensors, they're using a mix of analytics to be able to pinpoint how the water supply is actually flowing throughout the city, and as a result they're able to plug a lot of leakages and as a result reduce the revenue loss that they were otherwise incurring. So a lot of such use cases. There are more also that are there. You know, for example, Ixigo, the online travel booking app, they launched a PNR prediction for train travelers. And actually they mined data from some 10 million PNRs over 2 years. And as a result of that, they've been able to, get more than 90% accuracy. And this is expected to be raised even further. So this is another wonderful thing. I think, customers today who wouldn't want to know the update status of their PNR if they've done a train booking. And if somebody is able to offer them this, I mean, it's a real value to them. So that's the kind of analytics that is actually being done by various companies. So similarly in, finance where, a microfinance company is using big data, for insights on behavior of unbanked masses. And then as a result of that, they're able to design customized loans. Moreover, they're using geospatial insights and with credit decision process. And this helps them improve distribution and collection models. And of course, Reliance Games uses big data analytics for quick insights on customer behavior for product improvement. And as a result, they're getting some 40 GB data added every day and about 300 events captured from each device daily for each game session. So this is how they're actually able to improve the gameplay by analyzing so much of data and, events on a daily basis per game. And as a result, give the users a better experience. So I think these are all examples of different domains where they're capturing a huge amount of data and analyzing that data, and ultimately I have a business outcome. So it's important that today for every organization to understand what kind of data is relevant for them and be able to analyze that and into business results. So which is what brings me to the last slide, which is that ultimately you need whatever data you're getting it from so many different sources today. How can you actually analyze that and convert your digital vision into business results? So whether it's a sales strategy where sales team needs to understand the customer better and be able to predict future market conditions, you need data, you need advanced analytic solutions that can actually help you do that. Traditional market research to understand the customer is no longer just sufficient. What you need are advanced analytics to be able to analyze customer journeys, and that too across various channels. And I think that's the whole idea, that a lot of digitally led companies are doing that already. They're relying on data instead of traditional processes, and as a result they're able to bring innovative offerings for their customers. So in fact, just today I was reading that there's a robot in Italy that is now going to conduct an entire symphony orchestra for the first time. So that is going to go live today, and probably they'll share more details of it with us by tomorrow. But the fact is that the data is actually being put to so much of use, and there's a huge new economy that is kind of settling in, and we need to understand how this is actually happening if we want our businesses to thrive in the digital economy. So with that, I end my presentation. Thank you so much, and I'd like to invite on the next speaker, Bhaswar Goswami, who's a global industry SME for analytics at IBM, to take up the next session. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Anil, for that very informative session. So some very interesting use cases, some of which even I was not aware of. So thank you for that. So, so in the next half an hour, what I would like to do is to kind of bring to force, what are the key ingredients for a successful digital data-driven transformation? So there are 4 key questions which I hope to answer in the next 30 minutes. First is, what is the framework that IBM as an organization has adopted for this digital data-driven transformation? Second is, what are the key levers that you as an organization have to make this happen? Third, what are the common challenges and pitfalls that you have? And finally, and most importantly, where do you start? So let's start with a short poll question, which I hope you can see on my right-hand side. So while you put in the poll answers, let's give what is our definition of a data-driven digital transformation. So there are really 3 legs to this transformation. The starting of that is the organization's strategy. As Mr. Chopra mentioned a while earlier, that if you look at a data-driven transformation, it's all about experience. So rather than about features or product or service features, here we are actually talking about differentiated experiences which we are providing to the customer. For example, that Ixigo website which is there, which is able to predict and provide a real-time update on your PNR, or a matrimonial site which can give you, what is your best suited partner. So those are what we call as real-time experiences which are being provided at a personal level rather than at an aggregated level, which was what probably the earlier market segmentation was all about. Today you're really talking about a segment of one. And when you're talking about a segment of one, experience-driven transformation becomes important. And that is where data plays a key part. And it goes without saying that many of these changes that you bring in are disruptive in nature. For example, today we are working with a tire company which is looking at selling miles per, to the customer rather than selling a tire. So that's a very different kind of business model, and therefore they need to look at new channels of distribution. They need to look at new kind of data-driven experiences which they can create. And in fact, in a way, they are destroying their own, cannibalizing some of their own markets. So how are they going to do that is important. So the goal of vision has to be, properly understood, both at the top management level as well as, deep down in the organization. The second part of that is how are you going to make it happen? And that's all about operations. So basically your processes. How do you enable the processes to actually be, disruptive in nature? So that's the second leg. And the third leg is how do you enable this? And this is where all the new technologies like analytics, cloud, machine learning, all which comes in. So to me, technology is an enabler for this transformation. It is not the transformation in itself. And I think that distinction is important to keep in mind. So we have adopted what we call is what we are calling as a cognitive enterprise. So cognitive enterprise is our framework, which is IBM's framework for a data-driven transformation. In this slide, as you can see, we are talking about the same 3 levers that we spoke about in the previous slide. First, we start with the business processes. We start with the vision and strategy. Second, we look at how do you transform the current processes. And third, we look at what are the technology enablers for making this happen. So as you can see, many of the changes that we talk about, which is across the organization, whether we are talking about the shop floor, whether we are talking about a product management, whether you're talking about employee or customer engagements, all these are areas that we actually focus on. Okay. The fourth aspect, which is not very evident in this slide, is the fact that the transformation is actually not an overnight process. It's actually a journey. And this is the framework that we have adopted for this transformation. We start with process standardization. So really at the base level, if you take any organization today, maybe you will have within the same function, maybe you have very, very different kind of processes. Second, which is a very common phenomena, is within the organization there is no data integrity, for example, at a transaction level. So if a sales order which is being booked by sales, while that may not actually get translated into the execution in manufacturing. So those are common data silos which exist. So unless those basic things are rectified, we can't move to the next level. So our first step of this transformation is what we call as process excellence. Process excellence is all about standardizing the process, ensuring that we bring in the correct measures of the process, ensuring that everybody has the same understanding of the process, and ensuring that the processes are standardized across. Once we have brought in that level of process maturity, we move to the next phase, which is what we call as the analytics-driven organization. Here what we are doing is data which exists, structured data which exists within the organization. We actually ingest those data, create data models, and predict outcomes. For example, one of the outcomes which could be is what is a customer's propensity to buy based on the historical data which we have collected about that particular customer, right? Which could be very simplistic demographics, but also can include some more additional data, but data which is very much included within the organization. Finally, we move to what we call as a cognitive enterprise. Now, cognitive enterprise, by what we mean is that data is ingested in whatever form it exists. It is no longer just the data which is structured, which is available in one of my enterprise systems. But data can exist in any form. It can be pictures, it can be videos, it can be audio. I'm able to ingest that data in whatever form it is, and I'm able to transform that into meaningful insights. To do that, I adopt more advanced, say, artificial intelligence. I adopt machine learning algorithms. But my key transformation that I've brought in is I have now eliminated the barrier which exists between the internal data which exists within the organization and the data which exists outside. So I'm now becoming data location agnostic, and I'm able to combine data in wherever it exists and create insights. So for example, I could actually ingest data about a weather in a particular location, which is an external data. I could combine that with data which is about a particular customer, which might be residing in my CRM system, and based on that, I can probably suggest a particular product to that customer. So this kind of combination of data in real time and at scale is what is the main difference between the analytics-driven organization and a cognitive enterprise. Now, to make this transformation happen, a pretty busy slide over here. This is again, our point of view. We have identified 7 different levers, which is across, building a new enterprise, which is around orchestrated ecosystems and restless talent. The second focus is around creation of new business model and around understanding of the market. And third important lever is my lever for making the internal transformation in terms of processes and to get newer insights about the market as well as my organization. So these are the various levers with which we work in making this transformation, which I showed in the previous 2 slides. So I'm not going to get into the details of it each. This recording would be available, so you can probably go through each of those points in greater detail. Now, let's define what a cognitive enterprise journey looks like. Now, if you ask me, these are the 6 or 7 important technical and data components which you need to put in place in this transformation journey. We start with an integrated systems view right at the bottom. Right. So the first one is about various systems. So today, if you look at your enterprise systems, you probably have a manufacturing system, you have a CRM systems, which are actually talking in silos. So the first capability that you need to develop is to actually be able to integrate this data across various platforms into a single platform. Now, this platform could exist either within your organization, or more and more what we are seeing is this exists as a as a public cloud platform, which probably either is hosted privately or is actually a public cloud which is available. So the Watson IoT platform which you see there is the IBM platform, cloud platform, which is able to ingest all these various data. The second important thing which I mentioned here, which brings me to that, is the scalable platform for data ingestion. This is the cloud platform which we are talking about. The third is that your platform should be able to ingest data from various new sources. So when I say new sources, I mean data which you have not been collecting earlier. This could be data, exogenous data, like weather data, like econometric data. It could also be indigenous or within the organization data, like machine data, like employee movement data, for example. So those are new sources of data which you start, ingesting into your platform. The fourth one is that we start building models of prediction. So as I said earlier, for example, you want to predict the machine failure in your manufacturing shop floor, or you want to predict the propensity to buy for a customer, or the churn that you want to predict for a customer. So those are newer models that you start creating. To start with, you probably use the data which is within the organization, which is the analytics-driven organization, but more and more you start seamlessly adding more data into your model, right? Which could be, for example, data coming in from social media for a particular customer. And you start predicting specific outcomes. So that's the fourth capability that you need to start developing. The fifth is really to start augmenting some of these decisions using artificial intelligence or cognitive capabilities, right? Which, for example, you could include, an artificial intelligence chat box as a self-service portal. So when your customer is coming into in your portal, you're able to, he or she is able to seamlessly interact with the website. Now imagine a website like Amazon.com. While it is wonderful, it would be even better if I could actually go in and look for exactly the product which I require, and if there was somebody at the back end to actually provide me that insight. It would be just like walking into any retail shop, and that is the kind of experience that you can provide through cognitive capabilities. In fact, we are working with a couple of websites wherein we are, for fashion websites, where we are exactly able to provide a customer for what he is looking for. Some of these searches, for example, in a website is very much keyword dependent, but we are able to understand the context of the customer, and we are able to suggest the searches which are going to be more accurate. The seventh one, which is around the framework for continuous feedback and improvement. So this is another change that we need to bring when you're talking about a data-driven transformation, is that it's not a single model which is the final model, but you need to keep on enhancing this model as your processes changes, as your market changes, as you have access to more and more information. So you need to bring in this continuous improvement in your model, which the outcomes of which you should also be able to ingest in your organization. So let me just show you a typical use case on how we actually move on this journey. And I'm going to take the use case of maintenance. This is for equipment, but hopefully the same journey would be applicable to other areas as well, because I understand that this is more industry agnostic, but I hope that this would be relevant for everyone. So as you can see that the path to agnostic really starts with analyzing my historical structured data. So really to answer the question, what happened and why did it happen? So if an equipment failed, after the failure, I've been reactive and I'm trying to find out why did it happen. And I'm looking at the data to analyze that. The second, which is more proactive, and I start predicting on a machine which is likely to fail, right? So I'm able to predict the machine behavior. The third, which is around prescriptive. So not only am I able to predict that the machine would fail, I'm also providing the user or the maintenance personnel the insights on what he should do to prevent such a failure, right? And the fourth, which is around cognitive interaction, wherein I have an automated system which is able to ingest the data from that equipment, and it is able to automate some of these decision making. So some of these simpler decision making may not require a human intervention at all. And that is what I'm showing in the next slide. So I start with the reactive process, which is very much manual process. It's experience driven. So it depends on which maintenance person, how much of experience he has in the past, and so forth. The second, I'm moving into the diagnostic phase, where I'm able to probably capture this data, and I'm able to remotely monitor, how this machine is performing. I'm able to do some structured analysis. Say, for example, I'm able to ingest the data, and I'm able to do the reporting in reasonably short amount of time. The third phase of that is predictive, where I'm able to ingest this machine data in real time, and I'm able to predict the machine failure. And the fourth aspect, as I said, we are able to ingest this data into a cognitive platform, and I'm able to literally interact with the machine. So I'll just try and share some of the work that we are doing in this space. So hopefully, I hope that this is visible to everybody. So this is a work that we are doing with Kone, which is an elevator manufacturer in Finland. And what you can see here is a real-time interaction that the elevators are actually doing with each other. So what you see in in the green and the blue is actually a conversation which is taking place between the elevator and the cloud platform, right? So this smart platform is able to interact with the elevators in real time, is able to understand if there is a failure which is going to happen, and is able to then predict. So this is the automation that I'm talking about, which can be brought in. So this is the journey, a typical journey which I showed for the maintenance area. Hopefully for your areas, it would also be relevant. So for each area, we will have to look at this transformation. So if, for example, you're talking about customer management, or then that would be a different journey map that we would have to create. But the important takeaway is that do not look at this transformation as an overnight change or a single step change. Look at it rather as a journey that we need to undertake. Now, the final section that I want to cover is on what are some of the common success criteria that you need to adopt as an organization to succeed in the data-driven transformation. The first one, it's probably a little bit of a repetition, which is adopt the right strategy. And when I talk about strategy, I mean about the right methods, the right processes. Select the right toolkit, which is the correct platform and the DevOps tools. We haven't really spoken a lot about DevOps at this point, but that's the really new way of working, and that's probably some more information which will be available in the previous slide. So look at the platform, and DevOps is kind of the new toolkit that you need to provide the organization and the employees. And finally, is to look at the ecosystem. What are the partners? What kind of new partnerships are you building? For example, I spoke about the tire company while I was in one of the slides, which is looking for a new, a mile-based selling, which is what they're planning to do. Now, for doing that, they need to really have very different kind of relationship with the end user, which is the fleet manufacturer, fleet operators. Wherein earlier they were just selling it, now they actually need to understand them in much greater detail. And therefore, the ecosystem partnerships that they build up is very, very critical. The second aspect of that is to focus on mature and critical processes. Now, this is a very common thing which I've seen in my last 2 to 3 years that I'm working in this area, is that people want to get carried away by the technology and the cool factor of this. Now, it is very important to remember this digital transformation and whatever technology that you put in, you have to put in the places where it will have the maximum impact. And typically, they are in areas where you have differentiated capabilities which are very mature and they are critical for you, right? So whether it is, whether it's in your supply chain where you want to create that differentiation, or whether it is in the, in your customer analytics space, that understanding and and selection of the processes is very, very important, right? And a key metric for driving that should be ROI, though there are other metrics also which you could influence. But what my typical belief is that if you start with the ROI, that's probably a good place to start for selection of the right processes. The third is to look at this transformation as a customer-centric transformation. I mean, that's what we started with. If you look at any of the use cases which Mr. Chopra presented earlier, they were all about customer-centric transformation, and therefore you need to start building your journey also in terms of what kind of experiences, new experiences are you going to create for your customer. To do that, you need to start building what we call as the customer journey maps, right? So it's basically designing your processes to help them provide these kind of differentiated experience to your customer. So that's the third criteria. And the fourth criteria, and I've taken this off from the Harvard Business Review, is to look at your organization, so manage the transformation. Now, as some of these changes, as I said earlier also, that you need to break down some of the organization silos. You need to make your organization more agile. You need to make your processes more flexible. Now, to make that happen, it has to be a fundamental change in the way you operate. For example, IT can no longer remain a siloed cost center for your entire operation. They, in fact, become the change enabler for your organization. So the role of how you look at IT also changes. How do you make decisions, IT decisions, for example, changes? How do you make technology decisions change? So this change management aspect of transformation, of a data-driven transformation is also very, very critical to understand. So these are the four, key areas in my opinion. Adopt the right strategy, make a correct selection of your processes and your areas that you want to focus on, create the correct and detailed and journey map for the customer, and finally manage the entire change. So I want to just spend a very few minutes on what is our capability in this area. Now, IBM is one of the very few organizations which has the end-to-end capability in digital-driven transformation, which is helping you to design processes, helping you to design customer experiences, bringing in the analytics platform, bringing in the data science capability in both in ingesting the data and in building the insights, and finally to building in the process design capability to make this entire transformation happen, right? And so these are some of the data points which are shown there. So one of the interesting insights is that IBM is today the world's largest digital design house, right? So it's actually bigger than any of the traditional digital advertisement companies. So that's the kind of transformation that we are making happen within and outside the organization as well. Finally, I just want to end with some of our data tools that we have, both in terms of, which is actually running across all the capabilities that you need for doing the big data analytics and cognitive transformation. And these are really our product portfolios, which is starting with the integration capabilities, moving up to data collection and data management, and finally to doing analytics, which is right from doing real-time streaming analytics right up to the cognitive-driven transformation, which is what we spoke about in the previous slides. So some of the final thoughts and recommendations. First, these are some of the questions that hopefully you are going to take away from this presentation. First is, how are you going to drive the digital agenda? Who is going to and where are you going to drive from? As I said, typically it has to be an organization-driven change. And some of these, and this decision has to be taken from the top. So this transformation has to be top-driven. It cannot be, in the middle or in the operation area alone. Second is, how are you going to be optimizing your digital and physical components? And how are you actually going to align your business strategy to the new way of working? Third is, how are you going to adopt these new technologies like IoT and cloud? So and fourth, an important question is, rather than only focusing on technologies, what is the outcome that you're looking for? What are your key challenges? What is it that you're trying to solve? That's the most critical component, if you ask me, as far as this transformation is concerned. And finally, what are the areas that you're going to focus on? Again, takes us back to one of the earlier questions which I had, which was around how do you focus, how do you select the right areas on where you want to do the transformation? Because it's no use saying I want to change everything, right? So you need to prioritize, and that is a very critical thing. And that's, again, probably something that you may or may not have that capability within the organization, and that's probably something that organizations like IBM or some of the other consulting companies can help you with. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I just have one last slide. So we are having a very big event which is coming up on 18th of September in Mumbai, where we are going to be inviting the world leaders within and outside of IBM for a summit which is being called as the Genius of Things Summit. So we are going to present the our latest capabilities in analytics, and in cognitive, and how we are actually making the transformation happen within client organization. So it'll be fantastic if some of you can join this discussion, which is going to be on 18th in BKC in Mumbai. So with that, I hand it back, and I think we have around 15 minutes for question and answers.
Thank you very much. So ladies and gentlemen, with this we open it for Q&A session. Should you wish to ask any question, you may press 0 and 1 on your telephone keypad. Alternatively, you may use the chat facility to send your questions to all panelists. So, okay, so I think we have a few questions. So let me try and take them up. So the first one is that there is a thin line between analytics-driven and cognitive enterprise. Can you clarify more on this? So thank you for the question. So yes, there is a thin line. So if you ask me what is the main difference between an analytics-driven and cognitive enterprise, there are two things. One is analytics-driven organization is, as far as data is concerned, is more inward-driven. So it really relies on data which is available within the organization. Whereas a cognitive-driven enterprise is really a data location agnostic organization. So it can actually ingest data
in whether it is within or outside the organization. That's part A. Part B is the analytics-driven organization relies mostly on structured data. The cognitive enterprise, on the other hand, is the data raw data agnostic. So the data can be in any shape and form. It is able to ingest that data in real time or in or near real time and is able to provide insights. So that to me are the two key differences between these organizations from a data analytics perspective alone. So the second, I hope that this answers your query. The second question is, again, how do you predict outcomes via analytics? How do you do modeling for this? Can you give more info on this? So that's a great question. So in fact, how we model and how we actually predict is also undergoing a change. Okay. So traditionally, how it happens is, you would probably have some data residing in one of your systems. Somebody would take a flat file out of that, a query out of that, give it to some data scientist. The data scientist would then take the data into his tool, which could be any of the statistical modeling tools, and based on that, he would build a model on this. So let me take a specific example. Suppose you want to predict customer churn. So maybe he would, you would take the historical customer data and, sales and demographics data. You would probably take a dump from your CRM. You would give that to, flat file form to the data scientist, who would then, create a model and give you that this is a churn analytics, outcome for your customers. Now, the way it would happen is a lot of this can become, can be ingested in real time. So maybe you can probably now start ingesting data from the Twitter feeds or from the Facebook feeds of your customers. So, for example, a customer might say, I'm moving into, area X, or I'm traveling to this. So if you're a travel company, you might ingest that data from the customer in real time. You would be able to pass it around and then, figure out that this customer is visiting so-and-so place where the weather is so-and-so, and because of this, I need to predict, he would probably need this particular product. So you're able to be more proactive in your approach. But the more important thing is that the prediction actually now, whereas in the earlier phase, the data, there was a latency between when the data got collected and when the model was happening. Now you're actually breaking that down. Right, so so that is the kind of change in terms of how the data modeling is also happening. Right, so you would have heard about, for example, self-learning, models which are being created, wherein you are, and these are the more say cognitive systems which we are creating, where we don't program but we teach. So you teach that program to respond to customer questions, but you don't really program them. For example, a customer could ask you a question in any way that he wants. That okay, what is this is he could say a question in one form, but he might ask the question in another way also. So it is not possible to model all of this. So in that sense, the modeling is also undergoing a change. So in the artificial and cognitive capabilities, we are talking about new, like for example, you would have heard about deep learning, which are models which can learn by themselves. Right? A little longish answer, but I hope that it answers your question. So
yeah,
there is
some. Let's see if there's any questions coming in via the audio channel. So Sauradeep, sure. I think we've got a few questions on chat, but if there's somebody who wants to ask a question also, so maybe we can take that and then come back to the chat questions.
Okay, so we don't have any questions on audio, but I would like to repeat to the participants, should you wish to ask any audio question, please press 01 on your telephone keypad. Alternatively, you may use the chat facility to send your questions to all panelists. Thank you.
Okay, since there's no questions coming in audio, we'll wait for that. But in the meantime, I think we'll get on with the questions that have come on chat. Now, there is somebody who has also asked the question about and your experience where a transformation process has actually not really worked and why it did not work. Would you be able to share that?
Yeah, so, okay, so that's a good question. So, I can tell you of one. I won't say it's not working, but we have struggled with providing that, wherein we were looking at an entire digital manufacturing for a particular client. So while we are in a process of delivering that, but we have struggled in doing that. The reason why we have struggled in doing that is because we have not defined the use cases and business logic to some of the work that we are doing. So, for example, there was some reporting which we are, where we are looking at geospatial reporting, which the customer is asking for. All right, but we are not able to. So while we are looking at spending effort to do that, but we could not find a reason for actually implementing that. So if you ask me, so long as we are not clear on the business strategy and so long as we do not understand the business logic behind such, what we are trying to do, that is where we have struggled. Technology has not been an issue, if you ask me.
You have to be able to have the right strategy and understand, what really you need the outcome that you need in order to be able to.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. Okay, I'm not example, but let me just put it this way. If you ask, for example, there was a question. Okay, can you use video to find out whether there is any problem with my product or machine? The answer is yes, you can. Right, so a car manufacturer that we were talking to saying, okay, we want to take pictures of that car for while it is leaving the assembly floor to find out if there is any problem with that. Is it possible to do it? Yes, it is possible to do it. But how many cars do you have where you have such issues? Well, we have maybe one car a day. Well, does it actually make any business sense to do it? So the question, and that's why I keep going back. It's not about technology anymore. Technology is there. Right, you can take it. That technology capability will exist for doing something. The important part is to understand the strategy, is to understand the business use case. That to me is the key point to to start this.
As you rightly said, and in fact, some of the questions that follow are related to strategy for specific verticals. So, in wealth management, how do you really create a digital transformation strategy for data-driven decisions? Do you have any examples of that?
So I'll have to get back on that because I don't come from the banking background. So I'm more from the industrial area. So I'm sorry that question is extremely relevant. But what I would suggest is, please get back with. We'll get back to you. And we'll connect you with the right person within the organization who can probably answer that question.
Okay. And are there any successful use cases in logistics and the value that you bring to the table?
Right. So some of the use case, for example, for one use case that we are currently, working on, this is more in terms of the for an oil company where we are looking at building an IoT-based solution to prevent any oil pilferage. So what happens is, while the trucks actually move from point A to point B, there is pilferage of the oil which happens. So we are bringing in an IoT-based solution to actually prevent that from happening. Apart from so this is one which I can, which we are working on in the top of my mind, which comes in. Another one where we are actually looking at optimization of the fleet. That's another one that we are looking at. The third, which is not completely aligned to logistics, but more in terms of optimization of plant operations that we are looking at, where we used data to correctly schedule the production run to ensure that maximum utilization of the production line. Now you can extend that to the to logistics as well, because it's a very similar kind of business problem that you're trying to solve. So yes, there are use cases, and we have worked extensively in the area of logistics, in terms of optimization, where we have used some of the advanced tools, and now increasingly we are using IoT for making real-time decisions.
Okay. Sauradev, do we have any questions on the audio channel, or we'll just continue on chat?
So we do not have any at this point of time.
Okay, no problem. So we'll just continue with the questions that we received on chat. So how do you, really relate data-driven digital transformation with cloud technology? I think that's more of a technical question. So how do you really do that?
So I'll tell you my take on that. See, many of these data-driven, when you're talking about data-driven transformation, you're really talking about new sources of data. For example, you're talking about machine data. You're talking about data on the social media, right? So these are typically needle in the haystack kind of problem. What I mean by that is, if you analyze maybe 10 gigabytes of data, you might be able to get one insight from that. Right? Now, when you have such a problem, you don't want to load your traditional infrastructure with such data, right? So you want to create a scalable, cheap computation platform for that. So if you in many of these big data problems which you are trying to solve typically in data-driven transformation, you really want to create a separate platform for that. And I prefer cloud because it is cheap, it is extensible, it is scalable. Right? So that is how I would say it is kind of related to it. So without cloud technologies, what you are going to be looking at is very quickly creating a bottleneck of your infrastructure with so much of data which you are going to be ingesting.
Okay. So if somebody has equipment which is not network savvy, then does that really become a bottleneck in an IoT journey? And if it does, then how do you overcome this?
Okay, very interesting question. We are actually, as we speak, I'm currently, struggling with two, proposals which we are working on where we are struggling with this. So there are solutions to it. So, for example, typically you don't replace your, equipment every 5 years, or these are actually long-term, equipment that obviously you're going to capital equipment that you're going to keep in your flow. So yes, it is possible. So let me just take a few examples. So suppose you have an equipment which is which has a PLC. Then you can, and if there is an open port which is available, then you can actually connect it, drop in, data from that port, and you can take it to the cloud or push it to a remote location. If, for example, it doesn't have even that, right, if there is, no PLC kind of controllers which are available, then probably we need to look at other, wireless technologies from which we can collect the data from the controller and then push it. Solution exists. It could be either, hooking it to the PLC controllers, or it could be directly taking the data from the machine itself. So, for example, if you are connecting a pump, we might be able to, hook up the sensors to your electrical input, and probably collect the electrical signatures directly from that, based on which we can do some of the failure predictions for the pump. So it is possible. It is just that such equipments are more difficult to collect the data from. So, but it is very much possible to do. We, in fact, some of the, we have specialized vendors whom we in IBM actually work with for even designing some of these sensors if they don't exist.
Okay. Another use case question of using IoT and VR in the education sector, specifically up till 12th, from KG till 12 in schools.
So we are using VR, I can tell you, in terms of, that's a very interesting area that you're talking about, and I can think of a lot of use cases. But let me talk about one other use case that we are working on currently. So this is again related to machine and equipment, okay, wherein, we want to, like for example, a service, personnel actually comes to a machine. You want to provide that person with all the right information at the right time. So what we are doing is not so much as VR. We are actually using AR or augmented reality, wherein we are able to provide some of these tools and some of these manuals real time to that person, using that AR interface. So that's one use case that we have worked on. I mean, when we say we, not in India, but this is more in global IBM that we have worked in.
Okay.
So I think this is definitely, VR and AR are both definitely something that are going to become critical in, in the next 2 to 5 years. That's my opinion.
Okay. How do you handle the government requirement that every M2M operator should be registered and licensed from DOT, and every device should have its ID proof, with Aadhaar going forward? This may not be possible for all the scenarios.
So I'll tell you one interesting use case that we're working on. I can't answer for the first part of that question in terms of registration and license. But one interesting use case that we are currently working on is with a petroleum refinery, which is saying that, during the turnaround process, they have some 15 to 20,000 people who actually come into the refinery. And they do not know who these people are. So what they want is to use the Aadhaar, API, and to be able to do a know your employee or know your contractor kind of thing. So even before that person actually comes in, what they're asking is, we know that these 200 people will come into my plant today. So even before they come, upload their Aadhaar and get their biometrics, verified as they come in. So a person actually puts in, you can actually enter that, a contractor can enter by just using his thumb. So that's one use case that we are currently working on, and I think that's the second part. Every device, I'm not sure what every device should have his ID. I'm not quite sure what that means, but that is definitely every employee who will come in will have his Aadhaar validated. So that's definitely something that we are working on currently.
Okay. Okay. Now there is another question on data, I guess data privacy, where you're talking about customer experience in the process of digital transformation of a process, where customers are not really comfortable sharing their personal data. So the query is, how do you really make customers comfortable with the data that is being collected, and that assure them that it will not be misused, apart from the action that you're supposed to perform on it. So I think you cannot be 100% sure.
Yeah. So this is something that, at least we as in IBM, we take this very, very seriously. So data privacy is something that we do have, the correct level of, say, encryption in terms of data security. We follow very strict guidelines in terms of how we handle PI and SPI kind of data. So, and we have all our processes and technologies that we do have in place that data privacy, for example, we are ensuring. So some of the ways, for example, if you have customer data which is available, then we would ensure that we are not having access to the root data. We only take, say, for example, anonymized data which we need for building up the insights. So again, that security is definitely a very, very important part of the entire digital-driven transformation, something which I have not covered here, but we need to actually take it up on a case-to-case basis, how we are going to handle that. So, yeah.
But security measures are built in.
Security measures are built into our processes as well. So whenever we take that any kind of transformation or any kind of data that we actually ingest, say for doing our analytics, security processes are built in, and security both in terms of technology, in terms of, say, encryption, in terms of firewalls, and also in terms of the processes that we have to ensure that will not get violated.
I see. Okay. And how does cognitive differ from ELK stack, where this is placed for data ingestion and transformation?
So, sorry, what is ELK, if the person can talk? I cannot. Is this some sort of a you're talking about data being transferred? Is that what you're talking about?
I think
I'm not sure what
even I'm not sure what the person means. So we'll probably request if you're listening. So just give the full form for ELK, what you mean by it. We'll probably be able to answer it better then. Okay. And in the meantime, any use cases in the real estate segment?
Yes, there are, definitely use cases that we are seeing in the in real estate. So some of the ones that we are working on, more in the construction space, if you ask me, in the IoT space that we are working on, real estate. So we are doing a lot of work in the smart city space, wherein, so if you're aware of, we have very recently built an entire platform for Rashtrapati Bhavan. So all the data which, from various systems like camera, fencing and everything actually is captured into a single platform and it is getting monitored. We have done the same thing for Mumbai surveillance also. So that's one area. Second is around, especially for construction companies, the monitoring of the equipments which are there. So that's another one that we are doing. We are also bringing in, mobility solutions, for example, in the sales, for lead generation and for lead closures in the real estate segment. So, for example, when a sales rep is going to a potential customer, what are the likely questions, and as the questions get answered, what is the correct response to it? So those kind of cognitive-based mobility solutions also we are actually providing.
Okay. I think this last question we've already answered, haven't we? How would you relate cloud technology with data-driven digital transformation, and whether we can merge them together to run simultaneously? This is somewhat similar to cloud earlier, right?
Right. So I would actually it's an important question. So I think what organizations need to agree is that you don't talk about a cloud strategy by itself. Cloud is a given. You have to move to it. So it's more of I would say more in terms of a hybrid strategy that you need to talk about. What is the data that I want to retain physically within my organization, and why do I want to retain it? And what is the data that I'm actually going to be keeping outside my organization, and where am I going to keep it? How am I going to keep it? I think that is more important and more relevant question, rather than asking should I go with cloud or not, right? So that's one. And as I said, any kind of data-driven transformation, to me, I think the corollary is that you need some sort of a scalable platform for that. And I answered that question earlier, so yeah. So
right.
Yes, it is definitely related.
Okay. So I think with that we have consumed all the chat questions. We have already answered them. Sauradeep, are there any questions on the audio channel?
Yes, we have one question from Mr. Sujit Bhattacharjee from American Oncology. Your line is unmuted, Mr. Bhattacharjee. May please go ahead.
Yeah, good evening. I've been hearing to the session very, it's pretty interesting. See, I work in the healthcare industry. I've been here for last, in the healthcare industry for last 16 years. My question is we've been talking about this big data, cognitive analysis. One thing, we have been constantly facing is how to optimize our supply chain management. Something in a hospital, supply chain is one of the highest consumption. It's pretty, a lot of things. They've got 20,000 items out here. And how do you think this can be streamlined? Is there something you can talk about a little bit? Because we have been working very much. We have implemented ERP and all, but still we are facing a lot of challenges because of in supply chain.
Okay. So, okay, let me try and answer that question. So your question is very closely related, say, for example, to a retail scenario. So a retailer also has thousands of items, and he wants to know what is the correct level of items that he should maintain and where should he maintain that, right? So your typical ERP is actually not built for that, right? ERP is actually built as a transaction system. And if you look at any of the APO kind of solution which are there are very simplistic in nature. So to do this solve this kind of problem, you need an advanced optimization tool which sits on top of your ERP. So for example, when you are doing your supply chain planning, this data which is in terms of what are the orders which are there, how much of WIP do I have, what are the historical usage patterns which are there, all this needs to get ingested into this model which is built on this optimization engine, and it should actually give you what is the correct levels of inventory you should maintain. Say, for example, if you have 10 hospital chains in your chain, then and you have 3 warehouses, where should you actually be maintaining and what level you should maintain? So that is something that we do have, solutions to. In fact, I showed in one of the slides, if you look at, which was around optimization. So we do have tools, which we have created and where we have actually delivered. So we, for example, many auto suppliers that we have worked with who had a very similar kind of problem, thousands of parts, and they wanted to know what is the correct, inventory levels and the correct reorder points for that. So we do have solutions. Maybe you can reach out to me. Probably we can have a more detailed discussions on that.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, thank you.
Okay, in the meantime, I have received 2 more questions on chat. So, but are there any questions, any more on the audio channel?
No.
Okay, so somebody wants to know whether real-time manufacturing decisions can also be handled through IoT and cloud connectivity.
Yeah, so we are working on a couple of client factories on this. So essentially what we are looking at, say for example, use cases like a machine has suddenly gone down, right? And we need to do the planning needs to be, again modified and needs to be updated in real time. So we are able to ingest that data into our tool, and we are able to propose, for example, a new routing of that product. So that is something that we are working on. So I would say I won't say it's completely real time. The decision making is not in real time. The visualization of the breakdown is happening in real time.
Okay.
But the planning decision, is probably happening. There is latency, obviously, to it. But it's definitely, for example, earlier what used to happen, maybe in, at the end of the shift, we are able to do that maybe in, in 1 or 2 days. 1 or 2 hours. So there is probably no impact on my orders.
Okay, fair enough. So last question, somebody is using Panasonic machines for soldering. So are there any standard connectors available for pulling the data?
Answer that question. So more important than whether this is a Panasonic machine or not, we need to know what are the controllers which are there and whether those controllers have the standard protocols or not. So
okay.
If it's so it's more important in terms of, because a lot of the standardization is happening today in terms of in the control layer. But from a machine OEM perspective, I can't answer that question. We'll have to know the details of the controller to actually answer that question.
Okay, maybe that can be taken up offline to understand the requirements a little more detail, and then maybe the answer can be given. Okay, so with that, we come to the end of the webinar. It's been a fairly interactive and a lively discussion and Q&A that we've had. So thanks a lot, Bhav sir, for the interaction and for the presentation. Thanks a lot to all the audience for listening in patiently and then putting in so many queries, which indicates that you did find it useful. I think once we end the webinar and once you close the window, you will see a feedback form pop up. I would appreciate if you could fill that up and submit that to us as well. And with that, thank you very much, and see you again next time.
Thank you. Thanks again for giving me the opportunity. It's been lovely talking to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goswami. Thank you, Mr. Chopra. I would like to thank all the other panel members and the participants who joined us today. Hope you all have spent a useful time. On behalf of IBM and CMR, I would like to thank all the participants for joining this session. We hope it was a useful time spent with us. Do join us again for the next session. Thank you, everyone. Wish you all a great day ahead.